everyone, and welcome to our penultimate episode of Rebel Eaters Club from the first season. This is a bonus one. It's called Bonus Live Chairbreaker Caleb Luna. And the short little description for this episode is Caleb demands fat liberation, recorded at Rebel Eaters Club launch event at the Ruby in San Francisco. Get your starter pack, blah, blah, blah. It's 24 minutes. I'm going to put it at 1.5 speed as we've been doing, and we're just going to jump into it.
Hey everyone, Virgie here. I hope you're all hanging in there. I've been deep in quarantine-landia and dealing with it the only way a type A tourist knows how, by filling my time with ritual and work. Here's a short list. Creating elaborate tea time rituals, making chocolate chip banana bread, painting my toenails gold, stretching, meditating, dancing really hard in my bikini to Kate Bush, and listening to self-help audiobooks. Drumming on stuff, like literally just me drumming on the wall with my hands, has been weirdly helpful as an energy release. And then sometimes I have deep, heaving waves of tears when things begin to feel overwhelming. I hope Rebel Eaters Club has been able to offer some solace, and in that spirit, I wanted to play a live conversation I had in late February with someone I really respect, Caleb Luna, better known on Twitter as Chairbreaker. Caleb is an intellectual powerhouse, finishing up their PhD at UC Berkeley, and I have a very big friend crush on them. We first met years ago when fat activism was still a small movement. Since then, I've read all of their writing on the intersection of race, gender, sex, and fatness, and it's amazing to witness how they hold it down for complexity and nuance, but with a lot of heart. Caleb and I started off by talking about their favorite snack, Mother's Circus Animal Cookies. They were one of my favorite treats as a kid too, because not only were they animal-shaped, they were frosted, and they were pink, and they had rainbow sprinkles. And even to this day, they are delicious.
So I feel like I was talking to some people here beforehand about how these are such like a childhood memory, and I chose them specifically because I still love them and I still eat them because they're delicious. And also, I'm really stubborn. I'm a Taurus moon, so I'm really into the principle of the thing.
Yes,
and so this is
I'm
like,
a Taurus too.
Yeah. Oh my god, I was wondering. Yes, food and senses, all about it. But I find that I grew up working class, right? And now I'm like doing this PhD thing at this like institution that has all this prestige and blah, blah, blah. And like everyone around me is so thin and so like concerned with it and so obsessed with it in these like ways that they don't even recognize or think is normal and even good. Right. And so like continuing to eat the foods that I ate as a child is actually really important to me as a way of like maintaining like my working class background and like honoring it and recognizing that that's like what brought me into my fat body in some ways. And especially.
Okay, I'm not going to say I don't understand that thing where, because I was the first in my family to go to university, and it felt like a completely different world. I definitely felt out of place coming from a poorer background than a lot of the people, than quite frankly the majority of people around me. A lot of the people that I met had parents that worked in like higher job class stations than I had ever. I never knew anyone that actually worked in those higher class stations. And so I'm not saying I don't understand that pull, that tug between, it's like a tug of war between what you're trying to become and moving forward in your life, but then you also feel separated. You do feel this kind of weird separation between who you have become because you have been kind of given this glimpse into a world that no one else in your family has seen, and so it does kind of separate you. And I understand wanting to keep the roots. For me, it was more of a, how do I not completely alienate myself from my family strictly for the fact that I've been able to achieve this level of education and these life experiences that no one else in my family has had. So I'm not saying I don't understand those feelings. I do. And I didn't even go to like an upper class school or anything. It was a state school, but it was a university known for its rigor in my state. It was like considered the best university in my state. It still had that, I still felt that weird divide between now kind of really knowing more than, at least academically, more than anyone else in my family and trying to fit in at that school, but then still feeling like an outsider. It's this very weird feeling of feeling like an outsider everywhere. That being said, I don't think that still eating the shitty junk food from my childhood would be a way to still connect with what they call working class roots. I think there's other ways of doing that, and I think what's more important is maintaining a level of respect for people in working class jobs and not getting up on your high horse about it. I don't know, the eating the food reminds me of those stupid fucking land acknowledgements that are done in more progressive spaces where it's like, we acknowledge the land of the native people, and they'll typically talk about the local tribe, and yet there's no like volunteer work done on those tribes. They don't help to petition to make sure that every reservation has electricity and water and heat, because a lot of them don't, because they're not considered like U.S. territory, so it's considered its own sovereign nation in the U.S., and so they don't get the amenities. But nothing is like referenced to that. It's this weird kind of half-assed acknowledgement, and that's what it kind of feels like with the food. It's like, I'm going to keep eating this food to keep in touch with my working class roots, but I'm still going to look down on fucking everybody.
Especially as like these kinds of foods get really demonized in some ways as like unhealthy or sugary or processed and blah blah blah, and like everybody is like, I don't know, where's like the fucking low cal vegan alternative to this, right? Or whatever. It just feels important to me to continue to eat them because yeah, like I said, I'm stubborn, and it's the principle of the thing that these are delicious.
I just remember one of the first things I was examining when I started looking at the public health stuff around, like, you know, the campaigns and whatnot around the quote-unquote obesity epidemic, and specifically focused on children. And there really was this very, to me, overt line of reasoning around the idea that essentially working class people make poor decisions across the board, and eating is one of those things. And obviously I grew up working class as well, and I kind of think about how that relationship to these very class foods, right, like they stay with us. I kind of want to get into who you are.
Sure. I'm a Leo sun, a Pisces rising, and a Taurus moon. Like I said, I'm a PhD candidate. I'm a scholar. I'm an activist. I'm a performer, a writer, artist. I obviously am a fat person, and that has been like, in many ways, a defining experience for me, especially as like a super fat person, gender non-conforming, non-binary.
Yeah, I mean, you're in a program for performance studies, correct?
That's correct.
Yes. Can you tell for the people who have never heard of this, what is it?
So performance studies is an academic discipline that considers all sort of behavior as performance, that we're all performing roles at any given time. And I'm actually starting my dissertation this semester, and I'm writing about performances of eating and not eating.
Okay, wait. We need to keep going. Can you talk more about the performance of eating, not eating?
Yeah. Like this performance of like, oh, I can't eat that because I'm bad, or that makes me bad, right? Is a performance. It's performing this like sort of good citizen, which is like an individual.
Oh my god, that feels, one, so incredibly disrespectful to, I'm not saying that there aren't performers when it comes to food. There are. Especially for me, the one that I notice more often is I only eat organic, fair trade, whatever other like label you want to put onto it to be like the woke version of consumption, as a way of looking down on others and putting yourself on a moral superiority. Like, that does happen, but not everyone that chooses to eat organic does that. Not everyone that chooses to eat organic does it for a performance. Much like not everyone who's on a diet does it and references it in public as a performative measure. Sometimes it's, I'm trying to eat better. Let's not eat at Red Robin. Can we go eat at this veggie spot or something? Like, it doesn't have to, not every interaction around food where someone doesn't want to eat something is a performance. Just yesterday, I went to IHOP with my mom and sister. It was my big meal of the day. It was my mom's big meal of the day, but my sister ate just before she got there, and she was planning her big meal of the day for later in the evening because she wanted to go to her favorite restaurant since it's the weekend. So when we went to IHOP, she just had coffee and a couple of bites of my mom's toast because she was saving her calories for later in the day. I don't think that was performative. She wanted to do this. So my sister's very social. She really wants to be included in everything. And so this was not a performative measure of, I'm the thinnest in the group and I'm going to do this performance of not eating. That wasn't what it was at all. And I think to put that, because I feel like a lot of the times it's assumption that they make that someone chooses not to eat, and fuck whatever happened leading up to that denial of food. That in itself is performance. I feel like they do this a lot, and it's very frustrating because I think it completely ignores any nuance to the situation. It ignores that people are allowed to have their own motivations, and it ignores the fact that people don't owe you eating in front of you. People don't fucking owe you that. People don't owe you eating with you or the same amount of food that you do, or trying to eat as much as they can simply to make you feel better. No one fucking owes you that.
Individual who will produce a productive body towards the ends of the nation state. And so I'm really interested in the ways that fat phobia impacts thin people too, right? Because I feel like with these conversations, sometimes, like obviously fat people are impacted most directly, but I worry that sometimes the impacts on thin people gets lost as well. And so I want to put pressure on the ways that thin people are self-disciplining in ways to maintain a certain kind of body size that comes with the rewards, but also like comes with hardships. Also, thin people take up in some ways like fat aesthetics of eating in ways that are culturally valorized and obscured. And it's like, actually, you.
So people can't just do it out of their own self-discipline. It has to be a performance. Is that what I'm getting from you? Is that this is all kind of a way to further fat phobia, and it's done as a performance for some fucking reason? So it's not just, people can have self-discipline in eating and their diet and exercise simply for the sake of it, the same way that you would have discipline for a hobby or a skill that you were trying to achieve, or going to school. Everything is a skill. Everything is a skill that you must learn. Socializing is a skill, and yes, eating is a skill. Learning how to not eat just because it's good. Learning how to not eat simply because it's the social thing to do. Learning how to not eat when you are not hungry is a skill. It is a skill that is developed, and learning how to eat in ways that you will not eat excessively in caloric intake that will only hurt you later is a skill. Exercise is a skill. Everything is a fucking skill. And just because you don't want to build that skill doesn't mean you can demonize others for wanting to build that skill.
You really want to be fat, or you want to like perform the things that you think that fat people are doing all the time, but you're really scared too.
I mean, I'm thinking what comes to mind is this image. I remember once there was this, I found a t-shirt.
And can I just say, I find it interesting because in one breath, Caleb here seems to be demonizing like the performance of not eating, but then also creating this sympathy for fat people who perform like what they I don't remember how they phrase it, but like fat eating behaviors. And it's like, but they don't because they're scared to. But isn't that also a performance? You were just talking about how the performance of not eating furtherizes, not furtherizes, that's a fucking word. Not. On how it furthers fat phobia. And yet you don't see how just because it's on the opposite side of the spectrum does not mean that it is inherently good. Don't you think that doing performance of fat eating activities and stuff can also be harmful?
Sure, and it said I love fatties on it, and I was so excited, and then I was like, great, can I buy one? And then they sort of looked me up, and I'm like, well, I mean, we sort of, I was like, well, what sizes do you have? And like the largest size they had was extra large, and it was like a tiny extra large, right? It was like a baby tea. And I was like, okay, you guys, you need to get your branding and to get it together. But it just reminds me so much of what you're talking about. Okay, so your Instagram handle is Chairbreaker. I'm wondering if you can give us the origin story of this handle.
Yeah, so before I came to grad school, I had an office job, and there was one other fat person in my office, and we like kind of bonded a lot over being the only fat people in the office.
Yeah, as you do.
Right. And there were 2 chairs that were broken that were in her office. Who knows how that happened. But she was like really stressed about it, like understandably. But I was also like, girl, fucking good for you. I broken so many chairs before, and it was just like this real, like, yeah, that's the thing that happens because it's framed as like something's wrong with our bodies because they break chairs rather than like these chairs are insufficient because they can't hold our bodies.
Okay, but I'd like to know the weight limit of those chairs and how old they are, because if you are breaking new chairs with a 300-pound weight limit, you are too big. I'm sorry, it's not that the chair is insufficient. Not everything is an external fault. Sometimes you have to accept that where you have gotten, and we don't even have to get to the point of fault. A lot of people do this, and it kind of drives me nuts how sometimes when we're just referencing consequences, that it has this connotation of fault. Now, I don't think fault really comes into play here. I think it's a matter of cause and effect. You ate yourself to the point of obesity to where these chairs can't sustain you. So it's neither the fault of you or the chairs that don't sustain you. It is merely a fact. These chairs had a lower weight limit than could tolerate your body. Now you have two choices to make here. You can either continue on and accept that this is a part of your life, or you can work to get into a smaller body. However, if you choose to stay in a bigger body, that does not make you a victim, because this is a choice that you've made. A lot of our lives, not all of it, because there is a level of randomness and unforeseen circumstances, unforeseen consequences that are outside the reasonable assumption that can impact your life. However, this is a fairly predictable consequence of eating too much. If you are very large, it's simply because you ate too much. No one's saying that you are a morally wrong person. We're simply saying this is the consequence of eating too much. This is the consequence of you eating so much, is that you can't fit into chairs anymore, or you break chairs. It's not the company's fault for not having a chair that will fit you when most of their chairs fit the average population. As is, like, when you plan, you don't plan typically for the most extreme circumstances. No one is going around today planning for a second ice age, because it's really far out of probability that it would happen in our lifetime. So no one is like reinforcing their windows and reinforcing their house to be able to survive an ice age, because it's severely unlikely to happen. Such as planning your restaurant layout and the furniture that you buy for your restaurant. You plan for what the average person is going to fit. You're not planning for the 600-pound person, because the chances of a 600-pound person coming into your restaurant is very small.
Bodies, right?
Yes.
And so I was like, there's my new Instagram handle. People will frequently like DM me showing me like pictures of chairs they broke, and I'm always like, congratulations, another one down. We're gonna break every chair until there's none left that can't hold us. And that's really how we do this work.
So, like, a smaller bodied person sits in a chair and that breaks, and it's a broken chair, and a fat person sits in a chair and it breaks and they broke the chair, right? Like, and I always tell people, right, people are like, well, how do you know fat phobia is bigotry and discrimination? I'm like, because two people can do the exact same thing and you can have very different experiences of how they do them, depending on their size, right? And what you think about them and what happens. When I was thinking about you and human rights and fat justice, right, one of the things that has increasingly gone away from the conversation around body positivity, body justice, is the fact that we are fighting for human rights. This is not just a movement about the individual feeling good about themselves, though that's important, right? But really, when I think about the inception of fat activism and fat justice, I think about the ways that rights were always a big part of it. And at the end of the day, right, like, positivity is very important, but it's not actually a political tool. And in the sense that, right, like, positivity is not a useful tool for people who are in survival mode. You cannot wield positivity and get anything from it, really, if you're being denied human rights. So I'm kind of curious about, right.
So I'm curious, what human rights are being violated for you? Are you still not given a lawyer if you're arrested and can't afford one? Because as far as I know, that's never happened. Do people refuse your business simply because you're fat, and for no other reason than simply because they don't like the way you look? Most of the time, that's probably not the case. I'm not saying that never happens, but by and large, it does not. Typically, if someone's going to refuse you service, it's because they fear that you will break their equipment, which is very different from simply refusing your business because you're fat. One is saying, I don't like the way you look and I don't want you in my store, and the other is, I'm afraid of the cost that I'm going to incur because you are a customer, and the cost that I incur from you will far outweigh any benefit I get from your business. So there's a difference there. Just because someone refuses you service doesn't mean they're automatically doing it as a form of discrimination against you. Sometimes, once again, it is due to consequences, because their equipment cannot help you, cannot do so, it cannot provide you the services they provide. Like, let's say it's a fucking salon and they do mani-pedis and you want a pedicure, and their chairs either can't fit you or are unlikely to be able to hold your weight, so they refuse you service. That's not discriminating against you simply because of the aesthetics of your fatness. Or even just because you're fat. It's not even necessarily because you're fat. It's because they fear that you will break their chairs. It could be the same, quite frankly, and some people aren't going to like this comparison, but I think it fits. It's the same as if they were to deny service to a drug addict because that person is acting erratically and they fear for the safety of their staff. It's not necessarily just because they're a drug addict. It could be because that just from their mannerisms and stuff, they can tell this person is an erratic individual and it would not be safe for their equipment, their staff, or their business to host this person. And that whole thing about cute clothes, I'm not getting into that again because we're going to get into that plenty with the TikTok stuff we're doing later. I have lots to say about Megs for Fun once we get to her.
I'm curious about your thoughts on maybe the ways in which human rights have gotten away from this conversation, your interest in them, things like that.
Yeah, I think it actually is, for me, about identifying as an anarchist and rejecting social hierarchies, right? And understanding that social hierarchies are hierarchies of race, they're hierarchies of gender and class, but they're also hierarchies of body size. And that I can make the choice to not perpetuate them. And
that's not being an anarchist, though. An anarchist would be a complete rejection of... My dog's scratching at my door. Would be a complete rejection of the laws that are in place of the current regime. Anarchism is, by and large, a generally temporary state, but you're not really asking for anarchy. If anything, you're trying to promote a different political agenda, not one that is free of laws, but one that has more of them. You're not really an anarchist, and I think you saying that is simply you saying that to feel as if you're fighting a system.
Actions. But I think you're right that the conversation gets so distilled into how we feel about ourselves and body image and self-love and all this shit, and actually the stakes are much higher. I get so frustrated by that conversation, partially because thin people don't love themselves. But when thin people don't love themselves and they're still granted opportunities like admission to college, they get the job offer, right? Those things, it isn't part of the conversation. And those are actually the stakes that we're talking about, right? That fat phobia impacts our access to resources.
Honestly, though, most of the time, if you are rejected, this goes back to what I said about the businesses earlier. If you are rejected for a job, it's unlikely simply because you are fat. It is because your weight and how you move, because people can see you getting up and walking into the room for the interview, be it with one or two people, be it with a group of people, be it with the team that you would work with, what have you. They can see how you walk and kind of get a judgment of how well you'd be able to do that job. That's kind of the whole part of an interview. And there's multiple reasons why you could be seen as incompatible with it. A lot of fat people that we've seen are very entitled, and I have no doubt that would show through in your interview. So remember the correlation doesn't equal causation argument? So part of it could be that you're big and perhaps it's a more active job where they're going to need you to be able to hustle. And if you're 300 pounds, the likelihood of you being able to hustle as well as someone who is 150 pounds is very low. So that's one reason they could ignore you. Another thing is that with a lot of the fat acceptance people that we've seen on TikTok, a lot of them have elements of entitlement and victimhood. And to a certain extent, with certain people, you can smell it a mile away. And I don't know about you guys, but if I, like, smell the general attitude of victimhood or entitlement on someone, I don't want to work with them. And if I'm in the position to vote against them, I will. So I think it's interesting that they completely pin everything on fatness when there's so many different categories that can be included on that. And we see a general theme running through this particular demographic. And I'm not saying everyone, there's plenty of larger people that do not have this attitude, but given that they brought this up, I feel the need to also just kind of make note of some of the things that I've noticed in the fat acceptance group.
Resources and our access to livelihood and survival and happiness through having resources and having the resources to be happy.
Yeah, I mean, I use, like, body positivity is like business lingo for me at this point because I monetize my work. And when I'm talking about it in reality for my own life with my friends or, you know, privately or academically or any other thing, it's always fat activism. It's always fat liberation to me. Because liberation is an actual political demand. I mean, it's complicated because there's different paths to it. But there have been many movements throughout history that have fought for liberation, and there are, like, mechanisms that you can do to, like, that are tried and true to get rights, to get those kinds of things, like access to medical care.
And also, like, highlights that fat people are not the only people impacted, right? That, like, then people need, like, don't feel good about themselves either, and that, like, sometimes people are just naturally thin, and, like, that's fine. And, like, you can also feel okay about yourself. But yeah, it's very much like use that as as like the sort of Trojan horse to then be like, and actually this is what body positivity is to me, which is like the liberation of all people.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so I have tons more questions here. I've got all my little notes here.
Yeah.
Okay, one of the first pieces of yours I ever read was an article titled On Being Fat, Brown, Femme, Ugly, and Unlovable. And I really loved how you went there in discussing ugliness. I remember thinking there's power here, right? There's power in this idea, right? That, like, and for me as someone who grew up feeling super ugly, right? And being taught that I was ugly because I was fat, and those things were the same thing. And so for me, one of the most powerful things that ever happened was when I started to actually have sex. And I was like, wait, this is actually not hard. I don't understand. And I was like, I was being told I was never going to get that. I was never going to have sex. I was never going to have love. I was never going to have a relationship. And then I found that, at least casual sex was actually quite easy to acquire. And I kept sort of going through the math. I was like, okay, wait. So, like, we've got this person. I've had sex with them. That happened, I'm sure. And then that person, definitely real also, but, like, what it meant to occupy the space of being sexually desirable and also ugly. And I'm kind of I'm curious, do you still identify with that piece? Do you still identify with all of those words?
That essay I have such a complicated relationship to it because I wrote it when I was really sad at like 3 a.m. and like unrequitedly in love with somebody.
Okay, hopefully I was able to edit this well. I accidentally paused the recording, not the podcast. Had to go back to make sure you guys could catch everything. But this whole thing about her being like, but I thought I was ugly strictly because I was fat, but I'm able to have sex with all these people. So that does not disprove that. That does not say, one, that fat people are desirable. The truth is that chances are there's very few people that are not considered attractive to someone. Like, there's going to be someone that finds you attractive. And, well, actually, you were referring to casual sex. So, that's not quite the same. I mean, attraction does play a role, but there are people that are just like, I just want to get laid and I don't care who it's with. Not to say that was all of Virgie's sexual encounters. I'm not saying that. It's different, I think. Granted, it's not like I have experience in this situation, but from what you guys have told me in the comments, it doesn't seem like there's plenty of unattractive people that have casual sex. I don't know. Again, this feels like Virgie, once again, is just kind of tilting things in a way to serve her argument.
Somebody, and never expected anyone to read it. And then, like, I remember waking up at like 2 p.m. the day it was published, and like it had like all my friends were sharing it, and like it went everywhere, and I was like, oh fuck. And as part of its like virality, like I got a lot of like messages affirming that I wasn't ugly, which also I don't actually remember if I like talked about in that essay that like I don't actually think I'm ugly. I think I'm very attractive, but the world responds to me as if I'm ugly just because I'm fat. So I got all these affirmations that I wasn't ugly and that I just needed to love myself, and I was like, once again
though, like, this comes down to taste. And I don't think that the world made you feel ugly simply because you were fat. That definitely plays a factor. I'm not going to say that it doesn't, because I, just from losing a bit of weight, I feel like I look far more attractive now that I've lost some weight. And I think weight does play a role in your attractiveness level. I feel much prettier now that I've lost a little bit of weight, and I'm hoping that continues as I continue to lose more weight. I don't know. There's something that just feels a little narcissistic that's like, I'm a knockout, but people say I'm ugly because I'm fat. Like, not that they said that in exactly those terms, but that's the feeling I'm getting from what they're saying.
Once again, I see thin people who hate themselves all the time and they still get asked out on dates. So like, this is not the issue. However, I think one thing that I've learned since that essay is that yes, sex is easy. And that just because somebody's gonna have sex with me doesn't mean they're gonna respect me.
Yeah.
And that is like the thing that I feel like more fat people need to like, I don't know, hear or like understand, or like a process that we all go through is that like, oh, this is easy. It doesn't necessarily feel good. They're not necessarily like treating me well. And like I had this one experience with this boy who was like very attracted to me, and then like told me when we were cuddling that he could never be with me because he didn't know what his family would say.
Right.
And I was like, I'm literally just here for the sex. Like, you don't need to like overshare with me. But you know, so many more people are attracted to us than they want to admit. But it doesn't mean that they're gonna like be nice to us. It doesn't mean that they're gonna like love us, and especially not the way that we need to be loved.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I relate to what you're talking about, where it's like we're in the midst of this really intimate thing and there's clearly this desire and it's reciprocal, but then there's this public facing component. The public component is a significant part of how we understand relationships, how we understand love and intimacy and all that. That's a big part of relating. That's a big part of dating. That's a big part of relationships, right? Romance. One of the pieces that you wrote was about Grindr. And you said that it took you until the age of 29 to realize that you could be genuinely desirable and not just someone that someone settled for. And I kind of want to hear that story of that realization.
I would love to tell that story.
Excellent.
So it was actually right after I moved to the Bay. I moved here on a Tuesday, and like within an hour, this dude was like hitting me up and was like, when can we meet? And I was like, oh my God. My friend's here, so we're gonna have to wait a couple of days. So my friend who drove across the country with me, I feel like they left Thursday morning, and Thursday afternoon we hooked up. And I was very attracted to him, and and he was like very attracted to me. And that was the moment when I was like, I didn't understand that like I was sexy and that people could think I was sexy, because up until that moment I was only having sex with people that weren't really engaging with my body. And so when I met this person that I was really attracted to, that was really into my body, that we had good sex, I was like, oh, like I'm not a consolation prize, which I think until that moment I had always felt like, partially because that's kind of how people treated me.
Yeah, I mean, I can relate to that also. I mean, just thinking there's only two kinds of people, right? For me, it was people who don't like me and some kind of man saint who will just, out of the magnanimity and wonderfulness of his spirit, would tolerate my body. And I just remember thinking, right, like I have to be on point. I have to be smart. I have to be funny. I have to be fashionable. I have to have great glasses. And right, like, and then maybe he'll be able to overlook this like glaring problem with my body. And then kind of finding that I could actually experience and then demand something much better, right? And just kind of like the first time somebody was like, can I watch you shower, please? And I was like, oh my God, right? What a special day today is. And I just, you know, and I don't know, like there's just something so powerful about that. Before we wrapped up our conversation, we took a question from a super cute fat babe in the audience. She runs an Instagram account called Curvy Streets, documenting fat fashion in the Bay Area. She brought up how it's on trend for brands to make plus size clothes, and you can order them online, but when you go into the stores, the plus sizes aren't on the rack. I was really struck by one thing she said, that she feels like these companies are treating her and other fat people like their secret girlfriend. They want our money, but they're not sure about committing. Yeah. Well, and I think like the duality of fashion, how it's both, for me, it's both self-care and it's also armor, which I see as not as antithetical to self-care in a lot of ways. And so it's difficult, you know, and I think for me, I have a different persona when I don't look cute and I'm not like showered. I turn into this like very inwardly facing, very sort of like defensive, very person. And I literally see the shower as like part of the arming to go out into a world that hates my body.
Mm-hmm. I had this experience like a couple weeks ago where I went to fucking Torrid, the fat girl store, and they did not have my size in store. And I was like, what does it mean to be too fat for the fat store? And so I'm just especially like...
Sometimes they're just out of your fucking size. For fuck's sake. There have been plenty of times when I was... And one, you can't say they didn't have your size at all in the store. Unless you looked at every rack or you directly asked a salesperson. But my guess is if you had directly asked a salesperson, you would have included that. So my guess is that they didn't have your size in any of the stuff you liked. And to act as though that doesn't happen to thin people sometimes is just such fucking victimhood. It's just the victimhood mentality. That's all it is. Because I can't tell you how many times I've gone into a store as a medium, large, or extra large, because I've been in that range. And regardless, there was always a day at some point where I went in and none of the stuff that I liked had my size. It just happens. It just happens sometimes.
Like, bitter about that right now. But yeah, it's absolutely this thing where they want us to wear their clothes, but they don't want us in the store because we are somehow tainting their brand and tainting their image. They don't want us to be
Oh, for fuck's sake, get off your cross, please.
associated. And then, you know, I feel fucking trapped because I like looking cute. And like we have, thank you. Again, who knows if this is because I'm a Leo sun, but like my self-esteem is so tied to like how cute I feel and how cute I look. And like, I can't do that without access to the clothes. And so it's just, and so then we're like forced to, I mean, I still had to fucking buy Torrid pants because that was like the only place I know that can like carries my size. So yeah, it's garbage. I hate them.
Check out Caleb Luna on Instagram at Chairbreaker. That's one word, CHAI.
Alright, I think it's just going to be a signing off thing for the last minute or so we're just going to cut that. Overall, this just felt like a big pity me session, a half hour's worth of pity me. And thankfully we only have one more episode after this, and it's only 13 minutes, so it's going to be a fairly short episode next week compared to what it's been so far. I don't really have anything to add to this. About halfway through, they just kind of started repeating themselves, and it just seemed to follow the theme of I'm a victim, and I just get so tired of it, because that's pretty much most of what we've seen from Virgie is I'm a victim, and you should fix that. And it just, I'm over it. So that's all I have for today. For anyone that was worried about me and like my stumbling episode last week, I'm okay. So thank you for your concern. I appreciate it. It was little updates, since I don't think I did updates last week. It was the kids' first full week of school this week. Kindergarten was interesting. I've never seen as many kids with entitlement issues in kindergarten as I have this year. I think it comes from being quarantine toddlers, and maybe they just didn't have like the social aspect down, but they don't understand the concept of sharing. They don't understand the concept of listening to adults that aren't their parents. We had a couple of kids just outright refuse instruction, which happens on occasion, but there were more kids doing that than usual. And we had this one kid that just, one, didn't understand why we didn't know their name, didn't understand why they couldn't do what they wanted, didn't understand why they had to stay in line, didn't understand. And it's not, we've had plenty of kindergartners struggle to stay in line. That's just part of kindergarten. There's elements here that are very typical, but they're done in such a way that it's atypical. I've never had a kindergartner get upset that on the first day we didn't know their name. That's a new one for me. And there's a couple of kids that were just outwardly defiant. I don't like following instructions. Like that's a quote from a couple of kids this week. So the thing with kindergarten is outward defiance is not uncommon for at least a few of the kids. Typically, it lasts until conference time. Parents are brought in. Parents are like, no, that is not cool. Kids' behavior changes. A little bit of a hiccup after Christmas break. And then we are on like a new path of normal where they follow for the most part, but they probably still struggle a little bit. Very common with kindergarten. To me, It's frustrating when they won't follow instruction, but you can't really be mad at kindergarten. Because they're 5. They have the shortest attention spans of any child I work with, understandably so. And while we tried to explain why we ask them to do what we want them to do, they still don't always agree with it. Like, we want you to wear a name tag so we know your name. Because this is our first day with you, and we don't know your name yet. So we'd like to have a name tag on you to help us learn faster. Did not understand why we just don't know their name. Even after we explained, there's over 500 kids in the school. We can't know everybody right off the bat. And this is our first time meeting you. Doesn't matter. A couple of them were like, you should still know my goddamn name. So, fun times. Everyone, all the teachers that I know after the first week, are already exhausted, myself included. But we're just moving along. So I start my last program for a while to get the credential I need to be a school librarian, which is where I ultimately want to be. And things are kind of entering into a normal, I guess. Been reading Noragami, and goddamn does that series get better the further on you go. I mean, it's really a fantastic series. But I don't really have a whole lot else to talk about this week. I forgot to weigh myself. So maybe in the Friday episode I'll have Friday or Saturday episode. I'm still kind of working out. This schedule might adjust some as I figure out what's going to work for me with my new schedule. So anyway, I'm going to leave it here. I think this has gone on long enough. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.